When you get ready to ask a scientific question, it's important to think about your skills, and your interests, and your temperament. In my mind, it's a lot like trying to find balance on a number of different axes. And so one of the most common ones that people think about is their pre-existing skill set, right? So like things that they already know how to do. Now, you don't want to take on a project that just leverages the things you know how to do, because then you're not learning anything, right? And the point of being in graduate school is to learn some stuff. But you also don't want to be on the end where you're just completely lost at sea and don't feel like you can bring anything of what you knew before to a problem, because that can be really frustrating. And the ramp up time to feeling productive can be really long, right? So ideally you want some mix, right, in there of stuff you know how to do, and so you're going to be able to like do right away and start feeling really productive, and some things that are technically challenging or conceptually challenging so that you'll have to stretch yourself.
So when we choose a project, we can consider our skill set. That's one of the basic determinants of how feasible the project will be. It depends a little bit on how open you are to explore and learn new skills versus how much you want to play it safe with the skills that you have. So I would say it's personality and situation dependent. My first project for my first student was to take this commercial 96 well fluorimeter and rewire it to oscillate its temperature so we can determine the effect of the frequency of temperature changes on bacterial growth rate. And this student had never even grown bacteria. So after 2 weeks, I saw his motivation go down. It was just too hard. And so I said, okay, let's just streak bacteria on a Petri plate and count colonies. Great, it worked. Now let's do a growth curve. Oh, it's great, it worked. Now let's do another growth curve to see the error bars. Oh, great, 10% error, that's great. So every time I could both give feedback and keep the project at the right scale of competence. And so it's a communication. And a student can communicate to the mentor. It's actually your role to see where you are between the scale between easy and impossible, so as to keep the project always in the good place that takes you close to your edge, but not quite, so that you feel challenged enough and yet capable.
The other axis is the kinds of problems that you like. And this is not just what kinds of biology do you like, because most biologists I know are pretty interested in a lot of different kinds of things. I feel like this has more to do with the kinds of experiments that you like to do, or the sorts of ways that you like thinking about a problem.
Self-assessment and evaluation of what you like to do personally is a major driving force to deciding what project you're going to do. So just knowing myself, I knew, okay, cancer runs in my family. You know, I really want to know why my family's susceptible to breast cancer. So I kind of knew that I wanted to be in the field of cancer.
One other thing that I would say about choosing a research topic is that it's not very helpful if you choose to work on something that nobody in the lab has experience on and your advisor's not interested in. As a graduate student, you do rely on the people around you to help mentor you, and you're likely to get the most out of that environment if you are working on things for which there's knowledge within the lab.
So we have interest and feasibility. Now, these, of course, there's no units, so we can just rank projects by most to least feasible, most to least interesting. Just don't get stuck on a project that's down there, you know, not interesting and not feasible. Some people make a mistake and think that hard equals interesting, okay? So if what's interesting for you is to overcome a technical challenge, to measure things that have never been measured before, better before, then it's also interesting.
And then the other piece about finding the right question for individual people is about their temperament, right? So everybody is more or less comfortable with like degrees of risk in their project. There are also different degrees of organizational aptitude, right? So there are some people who are incredibly good at organizing complicated projects with a lot of moving parts and collaborators and things like that. And other people who are much better off working sort of more on their own, maybe on something that they can kind of control themselves in their own sphere. And some people who need sort of short-term rewards, right? So like experiments that happen on a shorter time scale, and other people who are sort of more tolerant of very long-term efforts. And you need all types, right? Like none of these are better than another. It just means that they should populate sort of different parts of the project sphere.
So if we take the effort to write down several projects for ourselves, then we notice that we can have in our toolbox a list of projects, a range of projects. Some of them are low-hanging fruit. Others are grand challenges. They're very interesting, but they're not so feasible. Maybe to break them up in the future to smaller projects, or to think about them as a goal for a long-term PhD or a long-term faculty position, etc. So for a beginning PhD student, I would say a low-hanging fruit could be a way to train. Or maybe if you are at the end of your PhD and you have just a limited amount of time, a good low-hanging fruit might work. So just to develop this idea that you can have a range of projects, and according to the situation, you might choose different ones.